chairs out soon. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. Nice turnout, even on a holiday week, so appreciate everybody showing up. I know, like many of you in the crowd, we're feeling anxious and nervous and afraid since the results of the election. Our wonderful Attorney General has been there before. During the first administration, he took over in Attorney General Jepson's shoes and really started fighting on behalf of Connecticut residents and protecting our federal and state laws. He fought back against climate rollbacks for car emissions, for, you're going to give a better list, I'm sure, than I am. Immigration policy, removing of visas for students who are here on international visas, and many other lawsuits where many attorneys general across the country really worked together to make sure our rights were protected. So I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. I know it can feel discouraging, and I feel really hopeful when I'm gathering with people who share my ideals and we talk about what we can do. And remember the power that we still have in Connecticut. So I will turn it over to our Attorney General, William Tong. We have a limited amount of time because we have a hard stop at 7 for the Democratic Town Committee meeting. So I hope Democrats will definitely stick around for that. But I'll turn it over to him first, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions as well. Since we do have a limited time, please keep your questions brief so we can hear from as many folks as possible. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Can we thank Jen Pope and everyone who put this together? Thank you so much. Please stand up. So lots to talk about. I'm happy to have a chat tonight, but let me start with a thought about Thanksgiving. This is a time to be grateful, and I'm extraordinarily grateful to be born and raised here in Connecticut, live in Connecticut. Before the pandemic, there was this prevailing view in many places that Connecticut wasn't great, and people wanted to live in cities, and they wanted to live in Brooklyn, and they wanted to sell all their houses. And then I think during the pandemic, things came into focus that Connecticut is pretty great. We're a little short on water right now, but in general terms, not today, thankfully, but in general terms, we've got great location, we've got great schools, we've got water, we've got a little bit of money, and Connecticut's in pretty good shape. And I think it's really important right now, this week, in this moment, to feel good about who we are. And my wife always says to me when I get a little down, you need to be a little more grateful. Related to that, I was asked in this moment, give us some, I've done this, by the way, a few times now. You guys aren't the first. I started getting these calls right away that people just wanted to sit with me, hear from me, talk about what's on their mind, just get some peace. And people have asked me, what makes you hopeful in this moment? And for me, it's really easy. Yesterday, I went to the Connecticut Children's Medical Center in Hartford, Connecticut, which is on the same campus as Hartford Hospital, which is where I was born 51 years ago. I was born the first American in my family. My father, as many of you know, has a complicated immigration story. I met my mom in a Chinese restaurant on Blue Hills Avenue in Bloomfield, Connecticut. and they got together, they opened a Chinese restaurant. And at one point, my dad was nearly deported. And it was because of an extraordinary act of grace and compassion by a Republican president named Richard Nixon that I was born the first American in my family, and my parents became citizens after I was born. So you see, when they talk about denaturalizing American citizens, it's very personal for me. They're talking about my parents. And when they talk about denying birthright citizenship to children born on American soil to immigrant parents, they're talking about me. But I know that my parents are immigrants. They have a complicated immigration story. They're naturalized. They opened a Chinese restaurant. I worked side by side with my parents in that Chinese restaurant when I was a kid. It wasn't great. It was hard. It was hot. It was difficult work. And in one generation, I went from that hot Chinese restaurant kitchen to being the Attorney General of the state. That only happens in one place in this world. Here in Connecticut, here in this country. That's what gives me hope. That being said, it's been a rough, not just a couple weeks, it's been a rough few years for our country. And people are really concerned about where we are and where we're headed. I'll answer questions tonight about specific issues the best that I can. But let me just say this as a starter. It is the policy and it is the law of the state of Connecticut, speaking as your Attorney General, it is the policy to take care of each other and to look after each other. And that's reflected throughout our law. So whichever group of people we're talking about, whoever you associate or identify yourself with, whoever you're concerned about, it's our job to look after each other and care for each other. That's what the policy is of the state. And so it's going to be my job to make sure that we continue to do that we honor that policy, that we enforce that policy and that law. People have asked me, Mr. Attorney General, are you ready for the front lines in this fight to protect Connecticut? And in a snarky way, I say, I've been on the front lines for the past 6 years, going on 7 years. And so let me just say that we, attorneys general, the governor, our state government, our elected officials, my fellow attorneys general across the country, we've been preparing for this moment, whichever way it went, for a long time. And I've been in this fight since the first 2 years of my attorney generalship. And then for 4 years, at least for Democratic attorney general, which I am one, people were less concerned about what I had to say, and now we're reporting it. But we are ready, and that doesn't just mean I'm spiritually ready or, I get up in the morning, I have energy, and I'm ready for this battle. We're ready in that we've been working on this, our teams have been working on this, we've been thinking through all of the various contingencies and policy proposals that are out there, and we're prepared to meet this moment with Connecticut's values, Connecticut's law, right, and that overarching principle that we're going to care and take care of each other and look after each other. The final thing I'll say is this. I'm going to get a lot of questions, and even though I give this disclaimer, I know people are going to have a hard time not asking questions about specific issues. I'm going to do my best to answer questions, okay? And I'm going to be as forthright and as candid as I can be. Understand that when I say something as the Attorney General, that means something. It can be interpreted as a legal opinion. And so I'm going to be careful about what I say, because I don't know what's going to happen after January 20th. I don't know how these fights are going to look, where, when, how they're going to hit us. Okay? And so I can't not only predict that, but I don't want to say things that prejudice our ability to represent the state of Connecticut and protect ourselves. So I hope you'll bear with me on that I need to be thoughtful about how I approach these questions. And also not to shadow box. Lawyers are trained not to do that, right? We confront real problems and real challenges, and we don't imagine them. That doesn't mean that I'm not anticipating issues, but I'm not going to address them without real facts, real people, real situations. So with that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes, ma'am.
So you say you're ready for this, you're ready for the fight. What is this? What is the fight that you are referring to? Can you share?
You know, I think that there's a lot of concern, for example, that there's going to be an immediate effort to conduct a mass deportation of people here in Connecticut. You know, I think it's really important to think about what that means, all right? And I try to tell people, as an abstract matter, okay, people, as an abstract matter, if you don't think about actual people and you can somehow compartmentalize undocumented people or people that don't have legal status into some other group that you don't have to see or hear from, maybe it makes sense in some way. But what I'm talking about are people who live and work here in Connecticut and who we live with, who are our neighbors, who are our friends, who are our family, and who power our economy. I heard a statistic today that half of the workforce in this country in our farming, meat packing, food production industries are undocumented. Half. Okay, so you know what I think about is it's going to get real for people when I have a 13-year-old, by the way. So it's going to get real for people when your 8th grader, I have an 8th grader, comes home and says, my best friend's parents or my classmates' parents were picked up today. And they have now been What are we going to do then? I think that's what mass deportation means. If you own a restaurant, if you own a small business, if you depend on, you know, people that clean your offices or wash dishes, to work at a job site, what will happen when people stop showing up to work because they're concerned about their personal safety?
Text me.
So.
Okay. All right, bye.
I just said that I wouldn't shadow box, but you asked me a question, and that's what I'm concerned about. Thanks.
Just one question.
Sure.
Can you talk about the abortion hotline and how that came about? And
So, I don't have to tell you that there's been, in my view, an unprecedented attack on women, patients, doctors, nurses, healthcare, and the right of a woman or patient to decide what happens to her own body. And what that means to me is not just the abrogation of rights and people don't have self-determination, but that they actually can't get health care that they need. And we're seeing this all across the country right now. So I'll give you an example. I went to Texas, I went to Austin, Texas with my fellow attorneys general to see it for ourselves. Texas has taken an approach to reproductive health care that is, you know, directly contrary to ours. What it means is not just that you can't get an abortion if you want one or need one, but if you need basic health care, it can be very challenging, particularly for people that don't have access to health care in a traditional way. What do I mean by that? I went to a healthcare clinic in Austin, Texas. Austin, by the way, if you haven't been there, is a bluish, purplish part of Texas, right? It's a college town, it's a tech hub. And in Austin, I went to a women's healthcare clinic that 2.5 years ago was full of patients and full of doctors and full of nurses and full of healthcare. And people didn't just go there for an abortion or even just reproductive health care. It was a sort of place where people could go for mammography, for OBGYN, for regular checkup because they didn't have a primary or, their insurance situation was tough. Whatever it was, this was a place where people could get basic health care. And now it's essentially shuttered, empty, abandoned, closed. There's one staff member left, no patients, instruments, equipment unplugged, unused. That's what it looks like. And this isn't some foreign country, it's not some other continent. This is the United States of America. And I know people say, well, that's not happening in Connecticut, okay? Well, by the way, people, especially young women, students, professionals, travel all over this country. I have an 18-year-old college freshman. What if she wants to go do graduate school or do a semester somewhere not Connecticut? You don't have to travel far, by the way, for the rights and protections and healthcare services to be very different than it looks here. So my concern is that Connecticut women, patients, doctors, nurses are outside of Connecticut, and they don't know what their rights are, number one. They face legal exposure, number two, and they're at risk. And so the hotline was set up to help people at least answer some questions and to point them in the right direction. And if they find themselves on the receiving end of some aggressive action in some other state by a law enforcement official, they can at least know what their rights are and what the risks are. What do I mean by that, by the way? So my colleague Ken Paxton is the Attorney General of Texas. And I'll be honest, Ken and I do a lot of work together. We have a lot of business with Texas. But he has gone to court to try to get access to healthcare records of women who are seeking reproductive health care. For what purpose? If not to target them and to potentially prosecute them for violations, I guess, of Texas law. So this is real. And what's happening in Texas, by the way, also is, we heard of a recent case, because you can't get routine reproductive health care, and because doctors and nurses are so afraid of their exposure if they provide reproductive health care, there are women who are having what would be a routine miscarriage, if you can call a miscarriage routine, right? But women who are miscarrying, in the process of miscarrying, can't get health care and are bleeding out and dying because doctors won't treat them. That's real in this country. And so that's why we need, at least at a bare minimum, a resource for people to ask questions. Hey, if I go to Texas, what am I, or Alabama or Missouri, what am I looking at? If I'm a doctor and I see somebody who's a student here, right, from one of those states, what is my exposure or potential liability? So that's what the reproductive rights hotline is about. Yes.
So I appreciate what you've been saying about Connecticut, and we take care of each other in this state. So my question is, we are this close to a third world war in this country, and I don't hear anybody talking about it. What do you say?
Can you repeat the question? Repeat the question, please.
I'll ask you to stand up and repeat the question. You want to repeat?
I don't hear anybody talking about how close we are to World War III, and what is our government doing about it, other than making it more likely. Yes.
I don't want to minimize the concern and the threats about what's happening around the world here. I'm concerned too. And you know, I have 18, 16, and 13 at home. And they have only lived in a world of great disruption. They're the post 9/11 generation. I try to remind, a little perspective. I try to remind myself, you know, because there's a lot of criticism of these kids and they're on their devices too much. You know, some people in this room mark their lives by where they were when John F. Kennedy was shot. That's how my parents marked their lives. I once marked my life by where I was when the Challenger blew up. That's how Generation X marked its life. And then 9/11 happened. And then Newtown happened. Right? And all these things keep happening, and my kids have seen it over and over and over again. And so I don't want to minimize the scale, but a little perspective. I was in Normandy this summer to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. At least 80 million human beings died, at least, in that conflict. The number is probably much bigger than that. Humanity has been in very dark places before. That's not even the darkest. And many people in this room have been in dark places before. This is not 1968. In many ways, it's different and it's worse, but we as a country have struggled many, many times with slavery, with the Holocaust, with Japanese internment. So I hear you, but I can't live in that space. Where I have to live is fighting as hard as I can for our institutions, for the rule of law. My sincerest hope is that over the next 4 years, this will be a process and legal and parliamentary and congressional battle. And if that's what it is, then I have tools and I have options, and so don't we all. If it becomes a matter of brute force, then we're in a very different place. Okay? Logistically, that's really hard to pull off, by the way. I don't want to minimize or diminish that concern, but my suggestion is that we focus on what we can control, and we focus on the process, legal, democratic, congressional fight ahead of us, and we do the best we can.
I'd like to actually, my question is a good follow-up of this. It relates to what we can control.
Yeah.
I have heard at various political meetings the suggestion of focusing on the local level. And I personally am not sure I agree with that. I want to start also thank you for the outstanding work that you've done to protect the citizens of Connecticut. It seems to me, and please correct, question's coming, just getting back. It seems to me that you've done an outstanding job of enshrining a lot of our rights in law and in the Constitution in the state of Connecticut. If there's, for example, a national ban passed on abortion, or another law passed at the federal level that, say, mandates states to use state police to aid ICE in rounding up refugees. My understanding is that federal law tops state law. No, so that's my first part of the question. I'd like to explain
So
that.
let's do constitutional law
Yes.
in 1 minute, okay?
30 seconds or less.
Why do we have an attorney general? Why bother? Why do we have a governor and a legislature? Connecticut is sovereign. Okay? Time to go back to the founding principles. We are a federation of 50 sovereign states bound together by our consent in a federation known as the United States of America. We have delegated limited powers to the federal government. That is as true today as it was when they were at the founding, okay? And it's called states' rights, guys, okay? And by the way, the Dobbs case, which I abhor, right, which I think was wrongly decided, the Dobbs case stands for that very proposition, that the states are sovereign, that we get to decide for ourselves largely how we are going to live. That's why we have a criminal law. That's why tonight, when I go home and I'm near the New York border, New York cops can't come into Connecticut and tell me what to do, right? That's why New York has an attorney general and a governor, and we have a governor and attorney general. Connecticut gets to decide for itself how it wishes to live, subject to our state constitution, the federal constitution, and the delegation of those limited powers. Here's the tough part of that. We have delegated extraordinary powers, okay? Including on the issue of immigration. Now that makes sense conceptually. Foreign affairs, immigration, this is a federal matter that states are ill-equipped individually to handle on their own, which is why we made that delegation in the first place. But that doesn't mean that we don't get to decide how we're going to use our own state resources with respect to immigration. The federal government has no authority to come in here and say, hey, you, Hamden cop, do what I tell you to do. On what authority? The Hamden Police Department reports to and answers to the people of Hamden, right? Which is a political subdivision of the state of Connecticut. These are not academic niceties. This is a fact. And that's why Connecticut and Texas get to make different decisions about how we're going to operate, how we're going to live, how we're going to protect women, patients, how we're going to care for each other.
My concern is with issues, how to look at.
Yeah, everybody just stand up just because we don't have a mic.
My concern is with issues that have occurred under everyone's law. It's been legal, it's been supervised by our economy and our economic laws to pollute, to destroy our environment, to raise our risk of climate change further and further. I mean, we're in climate change.
Yeah.
There is no way so far that we have been really making, some steps have been taken, but those look like they're going to be sabotaged very well. Our legislature in Connecticut has certainly not upheld our rights to preserve our health and further our survival. Our local governments, which is where I personally concentrate, don't have the money. Most environmental issues surpass state lines. The laws of our society are very economically based, and economic base has been interpreted to mean selling stuff, not preserving public health. Any thoughts?
Good night, everybody. Couple of big picture thoughts. First of all, just to pick up on your question and close it out, I would encourage everybody in this moment. Look, the country has spoken. It was a free and fair election. Donald Trump won. Period. Full stop. Okay. Okay. Listen. And we need to live in this space for 4 years. Okay, I'm going to do everything I can to protect us and hold them accountable, but it is what it is. Okay, so what can you do other than in 4 years mobilize and elect another president? What you can do in 2 years is make sure that we have a strong Congress. But everything happens locally. The action is in the states, gun violence the action is in the states. Civil rights, it's in the states. We're the only ones doing any work around here. honestly. Congress has broken for 20 years. Opioids, all of my work, opioids, social media companies, all of that is happening in the States. A lot of what we're trying to accomplish on the environment is concentrated in state action. I've sued ExxonMobil to hold them accountable for the effects of climate change. But you're right. The environment is bigger than us, obviously. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not great. One of the laws and regulations that I am particularly concerned about is the Clean Air Act. And under the Clean Air Act, there are provisions known as good neighbor rules. What are they there for? So states upwind of us here in Connecticut burn coal, and they shoot emissions into the air. Those emissions, because of the way the wind blows, blow downwind through America's tailpipe into Connecticut, which is why our air is not nearly as clean as it should be. And so when the former and future president tries to hollow out and has been successful in hollowing out the EPA and the Clean Air Act and the good neighbor rules that I have been fighting to enforce, the air we breathe is not clean. Okay? Two major Supreme Court decisions, which I'm going to go through now. I hope you can all stay awake for this, but it's important. Okay? West Virginia versus EPA and the Loper decision, which overturned the Chevron doctrine. Okay? Why are they important? Number one, West Virginia versus EPA says the EPA can act in any area on a major question unless Congress has explicitly spoken. Okay? And so it's complicated, but basically, if the Supreme Court identifies something as a really big deal, unless Congress has said specifically and explicitly that the EPA can act, then it can't act. Here's the problem. What's a really big deal? And when does Congress speak specifically and explicitly? And what's a major question? Okay? Guess where they got the major questions doctrine from, the Supreme Court? They made it up. Okay? And this is a court that professes to be grounded in history and originalism and the original intent of the founders, but they made up this major questions doctrine out of whole cloth. And so what does that mean? That means the EPA is now considerably hamstrung by this major questions doctrine. Because every time they try to do something, somebody will sue and say, that's a major question. And you can't act. That's number one. Number two is the Chevron doctrine. How many of you know what the Chevron doctrine was? Okay. So the Chevron doctrine basically said Congress is going to speak on big issues, major questions, on big issues, right? There shall be clean air. There shall be clean water, right? Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. Congress can't possibly identify every contingency that threatens clean air and clean water. It's impossible, right? Or there shall be safe baby food, okay? Or, how many rivets and bolts do you put in a Boeing Max door so it doesn't fall off? Congress doesn't know. I love Rosa, but she doesn't know, okay? So what has to happen? Congress lays out broad principles and federal agencies like the FAA, like the FDA, like the EPA, then spell out the regulations as to, how many parts per trillion of lead can be in baby food, right? Baby food, by the way, comes from the environment. We grow things to put in baby food. None of it is like hermetically sealed. So it says how many parts per trillion of PFAS can be in our drinking water here in Connecticut, so it's safe for us to consume. How many bolts and rivets in a Boeing Max door? Chevron says we're going to rely on federal agencies to make those decisions, and we're going to defer to them. That was what was called Chevron deference. We're going to defer to federal agencies, and unless they're totally bonkers, we assume they're right because they're experts, they're scientists. This has been the federal regulatory system of our country for more than 40 years. What Loper says, what the Supreme Court said is, no, we're not going to defer to federal agencies anymore. And in fact, Justice Roberts said, which I think is a little bonkers, courts are better equipped to make those decisions than engineers and scientists.
Lord help us.
But that's just not true, folks. And so what does this actually mean? This means anytime we tell Boeing how many bolts and rivets go in a door, Boeing's going to sue and say, nah, we want to put 10 fewer bolts and rivets because we know better. Every time we want to specify how many parts per trillion of PFAS, how many particulates we can have in the air that we can breathe safely, industry and interest groups are going to sue. This will paralyze the regulatory structure and process of our country. That, by the way, was the intention. And so that's why we're in a tough place. Let me just close out by saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So now the new president is going to have new secretaries. And he's going to run federal agencies like the FDA, like the EPA. And they're going to promulgate regulations. And guess what I'm going to do? If they speak on a major question, I'm going to say, that's a major question. You have to hear from the state of Connecticut before you can pass that regulation. Or if they say, you should defer to us on how many parts per trillion of coal particulates are in the air, I say, no, I don't have to defer to you. That's what Loper stands for, and we're going to fight. Dan.
Thank you very much for taking my question, and I appreciate you being here. Recently, the ICC, International Criminal Court, issued an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu for war crimes, which include crimes of starvation as a method of warfare, crimes against humanity consisting of murder, persecution, and other inhumane acts, and intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population. The ICC does not have enforcement powers, instead relies on cooperation from 124 member states of the ICC who are obligated to act on the warrants. My question for you, Attorney General Tong, one of your job descriptions is Chief Law Enforcement Officer. If war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu comes to Connecticut to visit friends Richard Blumenthal, Chris Murphy, or Rosa DeLauro, will you arrest him?
Thank you, Dan. Let me answer the question as best as I can. Like you, like a lot of people, I'm deeply horrified by what's happening, and with all due respect to people in this room, I'm here because my family are refugees. When I was a kid, I remember when the first Vietnamese, Cambodian, Laotian kids started showing up in West Hartford Public Schools, when I was at Whiting Lane Elementary, and they were being resettled in Connecticut, and I remember thinking, well, I'm the son and grandson of immigrants, and their refugees were different. In the fullness of time, of course, and with perspective, I've come to understand, what the hell am I doing here in Connecticut, right? Why was I born in Hartford Hospital? Because my family ran for their lives. From the Japanese, from the communists, you know, they didn't point to a place on the map and said, I want to go to Hartford. And so this is personal for a lot of people. And, 14 to 16 million, depending on how you count it, Chinese and Koreans and other East Asians were slaughtered during World War II. And so, it hits all of us really hard, and I wish there was something that I could do about it. I am Connecticut's chief legal officer, yes. I have no authority over these issues. I have no criminal authority, actually. People don't know that. The state's attorneys, right? You know what the state's attorneys are. There are DAs, they have criminal authority. I don't, and I don't have any authority to enforce that law or that arrest warrant.
Going back to your, I'm sorry, going back to your 13-year-old son.
Yeah.
And his friend's parents are taken away to another state. Now, we're supposed to be caring for each other, you said. Well, what do you do about that? I mean, really, what can we do about that? What's gonna happen?
So a couple things, and let me just be very clear and explicit about this because some people have contorted things that I've said and misconstrued the law of the state of Connecticut. Our law says that we care for each other, that we'll take care of each other, and that includes immigrants and immigrant families. And that includes acknowledging that undocumented people and undocumented workers are part of our human family and part of our economy and part of our community, and we should do the best for each other. It does not say and does not mean that if you are a criminal and you commit a crime and you hurt somebody, that the law will shield you. It definitely and affirmatively does not say that. Okay, and what the state of Connecticut, the law of the state of Connecticut says is if you commit an A or B felony, which are very serious felonies, rape, murder, and so on, that you should be prosecuted, investigated, incarcerated, and yes, you may be subject to deportation, okay, under the Immigration and Nationality Act. So I want to make that clear. But with respect to people that live in our communities and are our neighbors and friends and family and are just doing the best they can for themselves and their children, two things. Number one is, as I acknowledged earlier, the federal government has extraordinary power on matters to which we have delegated authority. That includes immigration. And so ICE has extraordinary authority in this space. And I would say it's plenary authority in this space. Plenary. Principle, okay? But what they don't have is the authority to come in here and tell Connecticut and Hamden police and state police to do their job for them. That's what the law says. The law says that ICE is going to do what it's going to do, okay? And we have delegated a great deal of authority to the federal government to manage immigration in this country. But it's not our job to help them. Okay, and that's not a controversial point. Remember what I just said about the sovereign state of Connecticut, limited powers of the federal government, right? State and local police are our responsibility. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is their responsibility. We don't shield criminals, okay, but we don't help them do their jobs. What I would tell you though is I've been through this before in 1.0, in 2019, 2020, and in that period, people rose up to support their neighbors, and they spoke up, and they demonstrated, and they let their voices be heard. And I can tell you on more than several occasions, that made all the difference. That even during Donald Trump 1.0, we helped people stay here in Connecticut who were undocumented, who had American-born children, because they were beloved by their communities. They were small business people. They worked in our businesses, and they were valued members of our community and our family. And you know, I don't have a good explanation for why that works, except that when people speak up and fight for each other, it can make a difference.
I think it would be a necessary tool for towns or cities to declare sanctuary status.
So let me answer that question.
Could not hear the question.
The question is about sanctuary status, okay? For towns, whatever political entity you want to refer to. The answer is, that word has no legal meaning. Okay, there's no such thing as a sanctuary city or sanctuary town or sanctuary state. It is a casual term or informal term that people use, but it doesn't have any particular meaning legally. So I think it's important not to use terms that don't mean anything. I think it's important that state laws and local ordinances say what we mean, which is that we're going to care for each other, that we're not going to do the federal government's job for them, and that we're going to respect and honor immigrants and immigrant families. That is the policy and the law of this state. Let me also say, though, I've been asked this question a number of times. The most important thing all of you can do is to protect each other and care for each other and not put people at risk. I'm not going to pick a fight. Why am I not going to pick a fight? Because it's not about me, right? And I would posit for many people in this room, I see a lot of folks who are probably pretty secure in your citizenship status. It's probably not about you. It's about people and families who have jobs and homes and children. And it's really important that we keep them safe, right? And not do anything that puts anybody at risk or draws attention to them or puts them on the front lines unnecessarily. So let's use that as our guiding principle, that there are real people in our community who need our help and protection, and we should care for them.
Can I just ask you one more question on that question? What does it mean when cities or towns say they are a sanctuary town or city?
As a legal matter, it doesn't mean anything.
So it just means that they're.
Let's use language that has legal meaning, and let's use language and let's take action that keeps people safe and doesn't put people at risk. Yes, sir.
What's your legal opinion about?
You just asked what's your legal opinion.
So Special Prosecutor Jack Smith recently decided not to freeze two important cases against our incoming President Donald Trump. So I'm curious what your opinion is on that. And then on the state level?
You know, nobody can
This
do
question
it.
is about Jack Smith and the prosecution of the president. I'll answer that as a citizen, and then in the same way that I answered Dan's question, which is I have no authority in that area, right? I don't have criminal authority. I'm not a member of the Department of Justice. I think two things. I think no one should be above the law, even if that's long-time Justice Department policy that they don't prosecute sitting presidents. I don't think anybody should be above the law. I also think that the Supreme Court's presidential immunity decision was wrongly decided and deeply flawed. You know, I can't tell you standing here today how to apply those principles. What counts as being, the president's official duties or not official duties, right? What are his core constitutional powers as opposed to his other powers? I don't think the court knows. And so I think it's a very dangerous decision, but I'm not on the Supreme Court. And this is the law of the land at the moment. Yes, sir.
Are you aware of any new laws or changes to current laws in the state of Connecticut that affect people?
New laws.
Yeah, like any new laws coming down, forfeiture, or any changes to current laws?
I'm not aware of anything new. The session's about to start. Yes, ma'am.
My question relates to you speaking of undocumented people that
Yes.
are in this country.
Yes.
Why don't they apply for citizenship? Is it that difficult for them?
Yes.
That's really hard. It's really hard.
Why?
Next
Why-
question.
why- wait a minute.
We need immigration reform bad.
very difficult for people, given the environment that we're in, you know, and many people, people who are undocumented ran for their lives. Their immigration history is complicated, and applying for citizenship in that posture is very difficult, if not impossible. Federal law says, okay, that as a country, we welcome people. And federal law says that when people come here and they make a claim for asylum, if they seek protection because of persecution, because of fear for their lives, it's our job to hear those claims. And when we hear a meritorious claim that somebody needs protection, we give it to them. That's been the law of this country for a very long time. Under the future president, when he was president the first time, we have turned our back on that law and have not enforced that law. And that's why, you know, we're in a really tough place. The other thing I'll say is, look, I know this is complicated for a lot of people. I just try to make it as real as I can. These are real people that live in our communities who we depend on. You know, I joked the other day in gallows humor, because in this moment, sometimes you just gotta crack a joke. I said, America runs on Dunkin' and immigrant workers. Okay? And I would just say to people, you know, if you think it's possible, if we think it's possible to deport 20 million people, or even 1 million people, and not wreck this economy tomorrow, I posit to you, you're wrong. You know, if you will only eat strawberries picked by American citizens, if you will only eat at a restaurant in Hamden where the dishes are washed by American citizens and not by undocumented people, you will never eat in a restaurant in Hamden again. And you know, I mentioned before, half of America's farm workers, half, meat packing, hamburgers. What will we eat for dinner? Right? Who will work on these job sites? By the way, okay, construction, my labor friend will get mad at me, but not every worker on a construction site in Connecticut is part of a union. Just so we're clear. And not everybody who's working on a house or a renovation in your home is documented. And if it were the case that everybody was, I wonder if people would be willing to pay that price tag.
We're gonna have one more question from.
Yes, sir.
Or one over there.
That last thing makes us collude in bad wages. And I don't know what to do about it. I'm more concerned, though, about what I do, saying never again to these concentration camps that are being proposed.
Let me just close with this. Let me just close with this thought. And I appreciate everybody who was here tonight, including the people that don't agree with me. Okay? But, and I hope everybody knows that I've tried to answer your questions that said I can't for an hour. Let me just say this. Two things. Number one, if you think that we're not capable of some of the cruelty that has been forecast, and if you think that a lot of what you're hearing is bluster and positioning and, you know, negotiation and made for TV politics, I suggest to you that's not true, and consider our nation's history. That's not to say anything other than I love our country. Remember what I said at the beginning. My life is not possible anywhere else. But let's be honest with each other. Not more than 80 years ago, which wasn't that long ago, okay? We incarcerated 125,000 American citizens in camps on American soil. It was a Democratic president who's been lionized by Democrats. His name's FDR. Okay? I'll tell you, actually. When this happened in 2000, when I became Attorney General in 1920, 19 and 20. I was here for a term at the first one. No. So in 19 and 20, there were a lot of conversations with my kids at the table. They were a little younger then. But I remember my daughter, Eleanor, saying something about the then president, right? She's the daughter of a Democratic elected official, and, it should come as no surprise that she hears a lot from me. And so she said, he's a bad guy. And I said, why do you say that? And she said, well, he's a bad guy, all these bad things. And I said, okay, it's complicated. Okay, history is complicated. She said, what do you mean? I said, Japanese internment. What's Japanese internment? And I did a good job as a parent. She knew what that was. Okay? And I said, do you know who's responsible for the incarceration of 125,000 Japanese American citizens? She said, no. I said, number one, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay? That's number one. Okay, that's complicated. Yes. You know who else is really responsible for that? The former Attorney General and Governor of the state of California, Earl Warren, who became Chief Justice and is responsible for the foundation of American civil rights law. Guess who never apologized before his death for Japanese internment? Earl Warren. Okay, so it's complicated. But what I tell you that story, A, because I acknowledge it's complicated, but B, to remind everybody, it's possible. We, as human beings, I'm sorry to say, are capable of incredible cruelty to one another. Okay, that's number one, all right? Number two is just to remember that we're talking about our friends, our neighbors, our family. And it is the policy of the state of Connecticut to respect, honor, and protect immigrant families and our immigrant neighbors and community. It is the policy and the law of the state of Connecticut to respect and honor and protect the reproductive freedom of women and patients and doctors and nurses who provide health care. It is the policy and the law of the state of Connecticut to protect and honor and respect the rights of all of our neighbors and friends, including members of the LGBTQ+ community. That's what the law says, okay? And that's exactly what we're doing.